My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Tamil Creator. I'm your host. Today, I'm very excited to be chatting with Tanya Selvaratnam, and she does it all. She's a writer, artist, and Emmy-nominated and multiple Webby-winning producer with more than 25 plus years of experience in the arts and social justice world. Welcome to the show, Tanya.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to share your story. I mean, for me, I always love starting at the beginning. I feel like childhood definitely influences a lot of your decisions or kind of that trajectory you take. So love to hear about kind of how you kind of grew up and your formative teenagers, and maybe how that eventually played a part in, you becoming this great storyteller and being so heavily involved in the world of social justice. Sorry.
Well, I was born in Sri Lanka, but I came to the United States when I was a baby, and grew up mostly in Long Beach, California. And from the time I was small, I was a voracious reader. According to my mother, I was reading at the age of 2. I don't know if that's true, but
Wow.
And I would read in the car, even if were dark outside. I was always having a book in my hand, and I was always writing and journaling, but I didn't have the confidence to be an author. There were so many authors who inspired me, and I thought, well, I'll never be able to write anything like them. And I'm still intimidated to call myself an author, but it gives me so much pleasure to write that I keep doing it.
So your mom told you started reading at the age of 2. I'm curious, like, were your parents big readers or like consumers of like literature, or like, was it like, how did you, I guess, become that way?
They were big readers. But I think for me, I just loved escaping into other worlds. I love the form, the medium of reading. I find that ability to because it's almost like a meditation.
Got it. And for me, this is my habit, I like to put people into boxes. And I was like trying to figure out the most succinct way of describing you. Just like when you go to your website and you like read about you, it's like very extensive, very impressive. And the one thing that came to mind for me was storyteller. Would you like identify yourself as a storyteller? Because you do write, you produce, I saw that you perform, and you obviously do like a lot of public speaking as well. So would that be the best way to describe you? Or like, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I love storytellers, so I love being called a storyteller. And I especially am drawn to telling the stories of those who should be elevated and those who should have a light shown on them, because they're doing amazing work and could inspire a lot of other people. That's how I work in film, in choosing the subjects that I collaborate on. And with the books that I write, for the most part, it's been taking difficult subjects and difficult experiences I've had and translating them into tools that I hope can help others, so that others don't have to wing it in the way that I had to in many situations, whether it be around fertility awareness or intimate violence. But currently I'm working on a novel, which is like a fantasy, about liking plants more than people. And it's called Leave Me Alone.
Great title. I mean, like I alluded to before, your bio and like your experiences is like very impressive. And you seem
it's because I'm indecisive. I'm all over the place.
Well, I guess the question for me is like, when you have that kind of personality and like you love working on different kinds of things, number one, how do you choose the projects you work on? And number two, do you find yourself constantly juggling between multiple projects? And how do you manage the organization or like headspace to like manage doing different things and different kinds of projects?
Well, I feel like I have a computer brain. It's able to like really juggle multiple things at once. And, it's been scientifically proven that women are better at multitasking. So I'm not a unicorn when it comes to juggling multiple projects. But to understand where I am now in my career, I look back to how it started, which is with the Women's Conference in China in 1995, working as a youth organizer on the organizing committee. And my major in college was Chinese, and then it was also what I focused on in graduate school. So I was able to speak the language. And being in China for that conference really transformed the entire trajectory, because I learned there the value of bringing together people and organizing towards a shared goal, which is justice for all. So that was very formative for me. And another formative experience around that same time was working for Anna Deavere Smith, the phenomenal playwright and actress, on a show called Twilight, Los Angeles, 1992, about the LA riots. And what I learned from Anna Deavere Smith was the importance of exploring an issue from multiple perspectives and not imposing a point of view about which perspective is the right one, to really understand the complexity of the human experience.
As you were talking there, I always butcher names, but she wrote Water, Fire. What is her name again?
Anna Deavere Smith.
Oh, no. There's a different, I'm talking about a different director. As you're talking
Deepa
about this,
Mehta?
Deepa Mehta, yeah. So
Yes.
she did another film. I think it was about the rape incident in India, the one that went like
Yeah.
up, and she wrote it about like you talked about writing a story from different perspectives. Most people focused on the victims, but I think she wrote about the system that created those rapists and kind of a
Yeah.
film that analyzed kind of their upbringing. So definitely quite interesting. And I know you, as you were talking and you were saying how women are better multitaskers and just natural at it, definitely agree there. But I think you're understating just, I mean, if you look at the sheer output of work you've done, it's just, obviously, I think women are better at that, but I think you're underestimating, I guess, how good of a producer of content that you are, just looking at the sheer volume, and like a lot of those projects are very high quality as well. So
Oh, thanks.
just wanted to mention that.
You know, I work hard, play hard.
And I think that's taken for granted sometimes. You talked about bringing, the power of bringing people together. I know you mentioned, an organization I believe you helped co-found called Pop Culture Collaborative.
Yeah, I didn't co-found it. I'm very fortunate to have been brought in to work at the Pop Culture Collaborative.
Okay, got it. Do you know, like, I guess could you explain more about kind of the work that the organization's doing and what they hope to, like, what they hope their impact will be?
It's a grant maker, an incubator, resource and research generator, and it supports and creates projects that further a pluralist vision of society in which everyone belongs. And it's called Pop Culture Collaborative because it does focus on reaching the millions of people, at least 150 million people, through pop culture.
Great. Something I forgot to ask you as we were chatting as well. You talked about making that move when you were very young from Sri Lanka to Long Beach. What is the community like as well? I'm always curious about what different Tamil communities all over the world are like. And I know there is a significant population in California in general, but what was it like for you growing up? Were there a lot of other Tamil families around? Maybe talk about that as well.
There were tons of Tamils around and Sri Lankans in general. And in fact, my father founded the first Sri Lankan cricket club. It was the Colts Cricket Club. And so my social life as a child, for better and for worse, was centered around going to the cricket games and having that high tea as a break. Just those games are so long. And but my school, I was usually the only Sri Lankan. So that was interesting. And in fact, when I went away to boarding school to Phillips Academy Andover, I was the first Sri Lankan to go there. So it was a very, dual existence, having the social life where everyone looks like me and has a reference point, which is Sri Lanka or South Asia, or being an immigrant, but then being in learning situations in schools where I was alone. And that was really interesting. And it was also interesting, to experience discrimination as a Sri Lankan, discrimination within our own community for being Tamil, and also for being a person of color. Like, one of my more vivid memories from childhood is when a white couple scratched our car while we were parked. I remember, I think we were going to a doctor's appointment, and they kind of like shouting at us. They thought that my brother was standing too close to their car, which was rubbish. And then when I remember they called one of my relatives a communist slut.
Oh, wow.
And then they scratched our car. And then there was like a mean girl in school that used to say in a derogatory way that, I had black lips. And when I was a kid, I would go around saying, black is beautiful. I love being in the sun. Sri Lankans are always like pressuring, at least the traditional ones, pressuring you to stay out of the sun, to be fair. But for me, it's like, sun is good for you. It's healthy. You just got to wear sunscreen.
Yeah, there's definitely an element of shadism within the community.
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
I'm not sure exactly the history why that is, but maybe it's like has to probably do with colonialism and kind of how things were set up in Sri Lanka, with fairer folks maybe treated better. I don't know. That's something to kind of dig into further.
I think the colorism predates colonialism.
How far back do you think it goes?
Well, I don't know. I haven't studied it. So, but I think we can't blame everything on colonialism, because there was a lot that was messed up about these cultures and societies way before the colonizers came. Colonizers certainly exacerbated a lot of harmful aspects, but they didn't cause all of them.
And kind of digging into, some of your other work as well. One of the titles you wear, or like the work you've done, is in the line of producing. And I've heard, the different producer titles, but I guess for someone like myself who doesn't fully understand that term, do you mind breaking down what producing is and like the different kinds of producing? And then even just, some of the opportunities you've had to get your projects on prominent platforms, the HBOs, PBS, Sundance Channel. So just number one, what is producing, the different kinds of producing? And then how did you get these different opportunities to be a producer on some of these projects that, made it big?
Producer is very hard to define because it depends project to project and person to person what exactly is entailed. But so I can talk about what I do as a producer.
This episode is sponsored by nobody. That's right, nobody. So if you could be kind enough to hit that subscribe button, that would mean a lot to me.
For me, it also varies from project to project because I produce so many different types of things. I produce films, I produce television, I produce branded content, I produce shows, I produce events. So it really depends. But I'm very much a soup to nuts producer. So I often will join a project or even incubate an idea for a project from the very beginning. And then I put into place the various elements, such as personnel, the crew. In some cases, if it's not a fully funded project, I help with the fundraising. And then I also consider myself a creative producer. So, and because I am a writer and storyteller, so often the people I collaborate with will involve me in the creative process as well, giving feedback and helping shape the story. And I'm really proud of the projects I've been involved with, and feel very lucky to have been asked by amazing artists to work with them. When I think about artists like Catherine Gund and Lucy Walker and Tiffany Shlain and Micheline Thomas and Carrie Mae Weems, and there's so many people that I've collaborated with, and I'm very grateful. I didn't plan to be a producer. I didn't plan to be an artist. I was planning to be a diplomat or academic.
So how did you fall into the producer line of work? Like, what was your first project, and like, how did that person know that you could do the role or you would be good for the opportunity?
Well, after the Women's Conference in China, I was then asked to work at the Ms. Foundation for Women. And while I was working at the Ms. Foundation, I was a special projects coordinator there. I was in my 20s. A friend of mine from college whom I had done theater with, his name is Jed Weintraub. He and I did a production of Dracula in which I played the butler. And he had gone the Hollywood route. He was working at a studio, a big studio, and I had gone the New York route. And I was doing theater while also working at the Ms. Foundation. But he reached out to me, and I remember the moment he said that he had an idea for a film and that he thought I should produce it for him. I had never produced a movie before. I look back and I'm amazed that I pulled it off. Jed had a lot of experience producing, so I learned a lot from him. And then that film ended up, it was called Online, starring Harold Perrineau and Josh Hamilton and Isabel Gillies, John Fleck, Eric Milligan, Vanessa Ferlito. It was an amazing cast. And that film got into Sundance. And it was my first film. And because it got into Sundance, then suddenly people thought I could produce movies. And so people kept asking me. It just like, I would be on the festival circuit and people would just on instinct reach out to me after meeting me. And some of those people I wanted to work with. And it just keeps evolving.
So two questions that come out of that is, number one, since it was your first time producing, there's a lot of knowledge gaps, I assume, from like what you needed to do versus what you knew. How did you learn those things that you needed to know? And then the second part is, I don't know if I'm kind of answering the question in a way, but you talked about like, because this was your first film that got into Sundance, which obviously there's a certain level of credibility associated with that, which, you know, provided these opportunities. So what percentage, and there's no scientific answer, can you attribute to like, you know, success to luck and obviously skill? Or yeah, if that makes sense. So love to hear your answers there.
I think it's about being open and gracious and always learning and staying curious and asking for what you need and asking about things you don't know how to do.
So were there people?
Yeah, being humble.
So were there people like, you know, those things that you didn't know? Was it a lot of self-research, or was it like, did you reach out to people? Like, how did you learn those things? I'm curious, like the specifics.
Surrounding myself with people whom I admire and could learn from. Watching them work really taught me a lot. And I'm a quick learner, you know, I'm like a sponge. In fact, my mother was always like shocked at how much I would absorb just by listening to people. Sometimes things that I shouldn't have absorbed, like the gossip. And I remember things. I tend to remember things. You know, when I was a kid, I had a photographic memory. So I don't know if I still do. I guess I kind of still do, but it's just that now there's so much that I have to remember that's hard to keep up. But yeah, I learned from watching people. I tried to read books about producing, but I couldn't get into them. I'm a big believer in like on the ground training.
You've written 2 successful books so far, and I mean, you have the 3rd one coming. So The Big Lie and Assume Nothing. Big Lie about, I think, myths about like, you know, female fertility, and Assume Nothing. I think writing even 1 book is difficult, but writing 2 and having a level of success and like this buzzworthiness is very difficult. So I guess my question to you is, what is your creative or writing process? So, you know, producing is one kind of skill, but then writing is, you know, I guess there's some similarities, but what do you do to write a book? Because I feel like it's very difficult to like sit down and break a big project like that into many parts. So yeah, talk about that.
Well, I'm a big daydreamer and I'm a big night dreamer, and I often write down my dreams. And I think about Octavia Butler, who would write down her intentions every day. And I heard about a study at, I think it was at Yale, that if you write down your intentions, you're 42% more likely to achieve them. With my books, I am an intrepid note taker. And when I look back at my notes, ideas emerge for books. So the first book, and each book is different. Each essay that I write is different. The inspiration can come from anywhere. It's really about looking up, keeping my eyes open. Also, because I'm an avid documentarian, because a lot of the films that I produce are documentary films. And so I am also an intrepid documenter. And I take pictures because I believe that pictures can trigger memories and help shape the world that I'm trying to create in the book. So I take notes, I take pictures. And then when I get to a point where I feel like I have enough notes and enough ideas, I will take all the notes, put them in one document, print out that document. Sometimes it's hundreds of pages. And I then read everything and I make markings on the side. And in some cases, I'm able to like have the chapters mapped out. So I'll write the number of the chapter that each section should go in. And then I kind of meticulously copy and paste it into a string out. And then I take that string out and I shape it further. And it's the way I make films as well, often, not always, but often. And in the case of the last book, and also this one that I'm working on now, Leave Me Alone, I had the title before I had the book.
That's very impressive.
Well, you know,
like your process.
I like titles. Yeah. And sometimes writing is a very painful endeavor for me, but it's cathartic. You know, in Assume Nothing, I say I wrote my way out of the darkness. It's very much true. But part of what helped me write my way out of the darkness was also knowing that the book would help people. I had no idea how many people, but I felt it would be helpful. And it was also very important for me in both books to include an appendix of resources that are more like bite-sized, so that it's like a toolkit that people have. All the things I wished I had known.
So you kind of alluded to this with Assume Nothing, but just for the benefit of the audience listening that might have not heard of the book or kind of what you went through, but maybe tell the audience what the book is about and like why you decided to write it. And like, I guess what you hope the impact of putting this book out in the world will be.
The book emerged from my experience with abuse by a very powerful politician. And then the book became like a roadmap to coming forward with a story of abuse and how to deal with the aftermath and how to focus on one's own healing. And really the importance and beauty of a community around you that has your back and will support you even in the difficult times. You know, character shows in the straits. So it's like the people who were there for me, I am eternally grateful for, because it was a very dark time, a very confusing time. And I had witnessed domestic violence as a child between my parents, and it was horrific. And I never thought that I would become a survivor of domestic violence myself as an adult, but it happened to me. And what was really heartbreaking was how many people reached out to me to share their own stories of abuse. And in some cases, there were people I had known for decades. And I thought, well, we are so good at not talking about the difficult things that happen to us. But if we start talking about them, then we can take the stigma out of them. And also we recognize that we're not alone.
Has there, you know, writing has proven to kind of be very therapeutic, and you've kind of mentioned this as well. Has there been anything surprising you've learned about yourself? And you kind of mentioned some of these things, but and about others throughout this whole experience, from like writing the book to putting it out there, and like you said, hearing things from people. Has there been anything surprising?
I mean, all the time. I'm surprised by how many people.
Did you know that every time you left a 5 out of 5 review for this podcast, a Tamil parent lets their child pursue a career in the creative arts? Okay, that's probably not true, but if there's a chance that it is, do you really want to jinx it? Leave a review. Do it for the young creative in you.
I'm surprised every time I get a note from a reader. And some of the notes are from men. And the notes are from people of all ages. And that is especially sad for me, that there are young people, like when I've given talks. I gave a talk at Bodwin College a couple of months ago, and I gave a talk for the One Love Foundation last summer, and also the Joyful Heart Foundation. And just hearing from young people at those events that have already experienced abuse. And we have to start talking about it, and we have to start rooting out the causes of it. And part of that is there needs to be healthy relationship training that's mandatory in schools. And that healthy relationship training needs to include, being kind to each other, how to identify abuse, what to do if you find yourself, find that you are a victim, and also about like pleasure, like sexual pleasure and desire, and not being scared of any of these subjects, the negative ones and the positive ones. And I also think self-defense training should be mandatory.
In terms of, I guess there's two questions. And number one, I haven't been following it as much. I've been seeing snippets of it, but I would just be curious about like your thoughts on this whole Johnny Depp trial. I mean, I've been following it at a distance. I don't know all the details, but have you been following it? And then, how does it make you feel, like kind of hearing any of the details that you do about what's happening in that particular case?
Well,
just because it's so famous, yeah.
One thing that friends know about me is I don't read the news.
Got it.
It surprises people, considering how much I work on various causes and with different organizations, but I don't read the news because it changes every second, and it's not useful for me.
And the second part of my question, as you're talking about kind of what you went through, is I'm not even sure how to ask this question, but I guess you, like the abuser in like this situation of like when somebody goes through like an experience like this, what part, or is there any value in eventually forgiving the abuser? Or like, I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts there, just because I'm thinking about the Deepa Mehta movie, and like when you kind of see the other perspective, I'm wondering, is there any value to thinking about that side of things, like how to maybe, if forgiveness of the abuser is part of the process of healing yourself as well?
Everybody is different. There's no one size fits all for how to move on from abuse, but I know that for me, it's not about forgiving or not forgiving. It's on focusing on my own healing and recovery, and making sure that I have joy in my life. We talk about making safe spaces, but I'm very committed to building joy spaces. And I want to say something more about the news. Like,
yes,
I will. If people tell me you should read this, then I will read it. But that was not the case with the Johnny Depp trial and Amber Heard trial. So I didn't have anyone sending me an article saying read this. And I figured that I will pick up what I need to know.
And like in terms of the inputs that you take in your daily life, you mentioned the news is not one of them. So outside of reading, is it safe to assume things like TV or social media are like totally things that you try to avoid or minimize, at least? Because I know you're active on I think Twitter, but just curious about your stance on social media, TV, any other kinds of inputs from the external world, like what you choose to take in to make sure you have this joy space or joy spaces for yourself.
I spend very little time on social media. And in fact, for a few years, I had deleted my social media accounts after I came forward. It was before I came forward, a couple of months before I came forward in 2018. And then I reluctantly joined social media again before my book came out, because I knew that I would have to be on it in order to promote the book. But I find that I spend very, very little time on it. And the thing about social media is you have to be social.
Mhm.
Whereas for me, I'm more of an in-person person. So, and I have so many wonderful friends that I want to spend time with them in real life, especially now that we can outside and summer's coming. Like I have a friend visiting now who's from California, whom I hadn't seen since before the pandemic. So that's what I'm spending my time doing, is when I'm not working, when I'm not reading, when I'm not writing, I am spending time with people.
Are you like, would you consider yourself more introverted, extroverted, or in the middle?
More introverted, but I've trained myself to be a good extrovert.
Because you can be extroverted for like a few hours or something at a party, and then you got to go home and recharge. That kind
Yeah,
of
but
thing?
I am like the queen of the drift. I I will slip away very quietly. I don't believe in like making a big deal about saying goodbye and stuff.
What do they call it? The Irish goodbye? You just kind of just leave.
Yeah, I think it's the French one too.
Ah.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Your book, Assume Nothing, it's been recently optioned by ABC and Disney.
Mhm.
Number one, what does that mean? And how likely would it be that this will be made into something for TV?
Well, when they option a book, it means that they are developing it into a television series, film, any number of formats. In this case, it's being developed into a television series.
And is it, and like what percentage of books that get optioned get actually made into something tangible? Like
Oh,
a
I would say a tiny fraction.
tiny fraction.
But this one, there was a very committed team. It's actually progressed quite a lot. I can't say more than that though, not yet.
Yeah. And how much input would you have, like as a creator of the content that is being made into something else, in terms of what the end product looks like? Do you have a lot of input, or does that depend on like the contract and arrangement that's made?
It really depends, but for me, because of the subject matter, I want to keep an arm's length away. But I, whenever they have questions for me, of course, I'm very available.
Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Like you're doing already so many different things, and you're curious. You're always looking to like try new things. Is there something? Is there, I guess, a world that you see for yourself in 5 years of things you want to be doing?
I want to have written 3 more books. The first is Leave Me Alone. The second is a companion to Assume Nothing, but it's going to be for young people, and it's called Trust Yourself. I'm working with an amazing illustrator, Shama Golden, who is also Sri Lankan. And she did illustrations for the essay version of Leave Me Alone that was in Elle magazine. So I'm a huge fan of Shama's work and very excited that we are working together. And I want to write a book about Sri Lanka.
What about Sri Lanka?
What?
What specifically about Sri Lanka?
Just meditation on Sri Lanka and what it's meant to me. It's like a letter to my country.
What's been, well, I don't like the word failure, but what's been like a learning lesson that you've experienced in like the last 3 to 5 years? And like, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, the the painful experience was the abusive experience. And I learned that, I mean, it's, shame is not the right word, but I am partially humiliated by what I went through, but I also learned a lot from it. I learned how to protect myself. And my motto for this year is I'm going big in 2022. I started this new job. I moved house for the first time in 16 years. and I am really spending quality time with people I love. And so I feel like the negative things that have happened to me in the past, they pale in comparison to what so many people are dealing with around the world. I mean, so many people in Sri Lanka, what they're dealing with right now is just horrific, that I really do count my blessings. And I feel grateful for so many things, in particular for my friends. So yeah, I learned a lot from that very painful experience.
If you had a chance to go back in a time machine, sit down with 16-year-old Tanya, what would you tell her?
I would tell her to pursue her dreams, surround herself with good people, and not to put up with any meanness or abuse, to stand up for herself.
And looking forward, in terms of your personal legacy, like how would you want to be described or remembered by your friends and family?
That I like to laugh, that I like to dance, and that when it came to my work, that I did as much as I could in the limited time that I had on earth to contribute to making the world a better place. And that I was a good friend.
Well, I mean, that's a good segue into the last part of the discussion. It's a fun game I like to call Creative Confessions. It's like a speed round. I'm going to say a bunch of statements and you're going to tell me the first thing that pops to mind. You ready, Tanya?
Mm-hmm.
Favorite Tamil food?
Sini Samba. Oh, that's not Tamil, but dosa.
Something that scares you?
A monster under my bed.
Insecurity you have?
I'm not insecure about them, but I think they're funny. I have like 2, they call them beauty marks above my lip. Like 1 would have been sexy, 2 is funny.
Favorite show you're watching?
I don't really watch much TV.
Hmm.
What I've watched recently, my cousin was visiting and she and I binge watched The Flight Attendant. We just loved watching Rosie Perez. She's so bananas in that show.
I haven't heard of that show.
And Kaylee Cuoco's amazing. I mean, they're all amazing.
I haven't heard of it. Okay, check that out.
Yeah. So that's what I watched most recently.
A place you're itching to travel to?
Iceland.
Why Iceland?
Because who doesn't want to go to Iceland?
I live in
want to
Toronto.
swim in the Blue Lagoon. I want to go to the springs. I want to find some, the little people that live in the trees. There's a great documentary about the elves. They're like elves, gnomes.
I live in Toronto, and when it gets to like minus 20, 30 here, when people say they want to go to Iceland, I'm like, I don't want to go from one cold place to another, but I get the attractiveness of it because of the northern lights and all that the beautiful scenery.
Yeah, you don't have to go when it's cold.
That's true. It's a good point. But there's something like romantically beautiful about it during winter. It's just like a nice concept, but I was like, practically, I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But
well, also, I love Bjork. I love Sigur Rós. I mean, the music is phenomenal.
Fellow Tamil creator that you want to give a shout out to?
I mean, there's so many. I mean, I'm so inspired. I remember it being.
Money can be hard to come by, but here's a $100 opportunity for you. Join my free newsletter for free exclusive content and a free chance to win $100 when I hold special draws. Did I mention that it's free?
So exciting whenever Ananda Kumaraswamy's name would come up. He was like the epitome of cool.
And I want to sound foolish for asking, but who is he?
Ananda Kumaraswamy?
Yes. I'm embarrassed now. You have that look on your face.
He was like the hippest dude. He lived part-time in London, I think, or maybe a full-time. He was in England. Apple Poetry. He like, yeah.
I'm gonna have to look him up.
He was a metaphysician, pioneering historian, and philosopher of Indian art. Huh.
Favorite childhood memory?
Roller coasters. I loved roller coasters. I haven't been on one in a long time, but I remember once going to Knott's Berry Farm in California, and going on Montezuma's Revenge 7 times in a row.
Favorite movie of all time, and it could be English or Tamil or both.
I don't have favorites. There's so many that I like. You know, I love movies. There's so many.
All right, name a couple so I don't restrict you.
In the Mood for Love. I mean, Juliet of the Spirits. I love Peter Sellers. I used to have a big crush on Peter Sellers, although I heard he was not a nice person. So I have a whole Peter Sellers collection on DVD, and I have a bunch of Fellini movies on DVD, and I have In the Mood for Love. I have a bunch of Wong Kar-wai movies. Yeah.
What's something that you've purchased in the last couple of years that you've splurged on, but you have zero regret about it?
I mean, I splurge on going. I tend to eat at the same places, but there's one place in particular that I go when I want to splurge, and that's Sona, which is a timeless Indian cuisine, and it's in Manhattan, and I love splurging there. They have these grilled oysters that are spectacular.
Is that your favorite kind of cuisine, Indian cuisine?
Sri Lankan cuisine. Sri Lankan cuisine is spectacular.
What's a place in Manhattan or like New York that has good Sri Lankan cuisine?
Sea Giri on First Avenue. It's like tucked in amongst a whole bunch of Indian restaurants. That's a great one. And then on Staten Island, they have amazing Sri Lankan food, really amazing. I go to New Asha, but there's a lot of good ones there. Yeah.
What's a pet peeve of yours?
It depends. In my work, a pet peeve is when I have to chase after people to find out if they've done what they were supposed to do. That's a pet peeve. Yeah.
If you knew that you were going to die tomorrow, a regret that you would have?
I don't know. It makes me want to call up everybody I know and tell them I love them.
Celebrity or person whose life you want to experience for one day?
I like my life. I don't really want to be anybody else.
Even for one day, you're not curious about one person's life? Like just what they go through?
Not really.
What about a favorite book you read recently or a podcast that you've listened to that's had an impact on you?
I really enjoyed, well, 2 podcasts, and I actually don't listen to podcasts very much, but when I was in Portland, Oregon, at the height of the pandemic, I would go on hikes and listen to Dolly Parton's America. I grew up on country music. My father went to school at Vanderbilt in Nashville, Tennessee. He went there partially because, I mean, it was an amazing school, but also he loved country music. And so I grew up on country music. I saw all the country greats when I was a child. We used to go to Las Vegas a lot, too much. And so country music's very much in my blood. And I loved listening to Dolly Parton's America. And then there's a collective called The Meteor that I'm a founding member of, and a podcast called Because of Anita, hosted by Cindy Levy and Salamisha Tillett. And it is so powerful about the legacy of Anita Hill. Those ones really rocked me.
What's a belief, behavior, or habit that has improved your life recently?
Meditation. I meditate like sometimes 3 times a day.
And what is a piece of advice that you would give to your fellow aspiring Tamil creators out there?
Build a community around you. Don't go it alone, and ask for what you need. But ask delicately. Like, don't be a pest.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Tanya. That's a great way to end off the podcast. Some great insights there. For somebody listening that was inspired and wants to reach out, maybe to pick your brain or connect, what is the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Okay, I'm going to make a small correction.
Yes.
A pet peeve of mine is when people say pick your brain. It's not something that you should ever say to people.
Okay.
Like, I find it very annoying when people reach out to me and say, hey, I just want to pick your brain. I'm like, and what? That's like not delicate.
Mm.
So I'm saying, I say this with all, respect. But what was the question? Rephrase it.
I'll
Please.
rephrase it. Yes. If somebody listening to this was inspired and they just want to reach out to you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Through my website, tanyaturns-up.com.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you again, Tanya, for making time to chat and share your amazing story. And for those of you listening, appreciate you guys as always for listening.
Thank you.